us to be on Google Meet tonight because I only have the free version of Zoom, so then we only get 40 minutes, and I always get cut off. As you can see, I like to ramble, so anyway, okay, cool. All right, well, I'll let people in as they come, but anyways, my name's Abby Lee. Thanks for joining us tonight. I wanted to do a Eunice! Hey, Eunice, it's good to see you. I'm so excited that you're here. Guys, I have to shout out Eunice. Her fabulous essay was just published in Elle about Kamala Harris's inauguration, and I got to edit that pitch. So if you want to support a fellow writer, please go check that essay out. Eunice, if you want to drop the link in the chat, please do, but don't feel obligated if that makes you a little shy or whatever. So anyway, I want to thank you all for joining. I love to do Q&As. Gosh, y'all are still coming in. Shit, it's going to be a busy night. Good, I'm glad to see it. I want to get started.
Because you're famous.
Oh, no, I'm not famous, Tom. Although I went to the coffee shop today, and as I was getting my little donut, the guy was like, "So, how's your day going? Has anything special happened?" And I was like, "Well, let me tell you." And then he started reading the essay, and it did make me feel famous just for a little second. John, I owe you a pitch edit, buddy. It's coming, I promise you. Thank you for joining. John, I swear to God, I'm going to get that pitch edited. Anyway, so, yeah, so thank you all for joining. I like to do Q&As when I can. It's part of what I think is really necessary anti-gatekeeping work in the journalism industry. It's kind of like racism. It's not enough to not be racist, and it's not enough to not gatekeep. You have to be anti as well. So I knew as soon as I published something in the New York Times, I really wanted to talk to everybody about how that happened, if you had any questions. So on that note, we'll get started on the Q&A. If you can hear that, people are still coming in, so you'll see me get distracted and let people join. If you are sensitive about this kind of thing, just know that I am screen recording and I'm recording the audio, so feel free to turn your cameras off and mute in between. And like I said, there will be a playback, a transcript. Thanks, John. I appreciate your patience, but it's literally in my bullet journal. So it's in my journal, and it's going to happen. Anyway, so yes. So what were we talking about? Oh, there's going to be a playback, a replay, and a transcript if you need that in the Bitch and Pitchin' newsletter, this month's edition. So let me go ahead and invite you to start dropping questions in the chat. Since there's several of us here, I want to go ahead and get the ball rolling. Just as a reminder, the essay that I sort of built this Q&A around was the real meaning of being a hillbilly. So if you have any questions about specifically pitching the op-ed section of the New York Times, or any questions about that essay or invoicing, or if you want to know my rate, drop all those questions in the chat. If you have general questions about pitching, about how to pitch, about who to pitch, invoicing, essentially the only freelance and writing topics that are off limits are like legal and tax stuff, because I'm not a well, see, clearly I'm not a certified tax preparer because I don't even know the acronym for it. But I'm not a legal expert in any way, shape, form, or fashion. So feel free to ask me questions about contracts and stuff, but realize that I can only give my personal experience. And I will do my best to chat with everyone and answer all your questions. So drop those in the chat, and then sometimes I'll ask you for additional clarification if I don't understand your question, but we'll answer them all. And also, just so you know, I followed a new rice cooker recipe today. My rice cooker is overfull, so at some point during this, I'm going to have to get up and check my rice cooker because I do not want like a terrible soy sauce explosion. So I'm going to have to get up and make sure that it's not like going to explode. So note to Nicole, when you get to that part in the video, you do not have to transcribe me getting up and checking my fucking rice cooker, okay? Because it's just for safety purposes. All right. But I really desperately want dinner when this is done. So that's why it is what it is. All right, cool. So let's jump in. The New York Times seems particularly opaque in terms of what editors cover, what sections, columns, etc. Any tips for knowing who to pitch? Laura, this is a great question, and it's something that I struggle with as well. In the background, I'm going to open up a document that may also help us. God, my poor computer. It's like another tab. I don't know if I can do this. So while that's loaded, let me jump back and answer. The only sections of the New York Times that I'm familiar with are the New York Times style section, which I'm going to drop a guidance document link to in just a moment, and the op-ed section. So I'll kind of walk you through. In the beginning, I pitched Clay Risen. He was the previous op-ed editor. When I pitched him this essay about rednecks, he informed me that I should pitch Kristen Lynn, who I then pitched, who is now the head, to the best of my knowledge, the head of the op-ed editorial department. Apart from that, I'm not super familiar. I have pitched other sections, and let me grab this document here. So this is the NYT Styles Desk Freelance Guide. I have pitched several of these editors. I have yet to land a byline in the other sections, but I do keep trying. So these are basically the freelance guidelines for other sections of the New York Times. You'll find things here for not breaking news, but like newsy feature type stories, tech related stories, human interest and lifestyle related stories. So use that document. It does uncover a little bit about who is on staff and what they take. I have gotten responses from these editors. They're what I call positive rejections, like, hey, this is not a fit, but keep pitching us. And I say that so that I can confirm to you that I know that those people are at least still there for now. And that document seems to be accurate for now, but yes, it is quite opaque. You're right. So I know who's in op-ed, and I know this freelance guide, and I hope that that's helpful for you. If I had more, I would give it to you, but I am only one person, and I have yet to learn all the editors, and so I hope that will help you. Okay, I have an idea I want to pitch to someone I chat with on Twitter. Any do's or don'ts? That's a great question, Tom. Usually when I pitch things on Twitter, I don't send them the full pitch. I'll just DM the editor and say, hey, are you the right person to pitch an idea about, I don't know, drug use among Florida alligators? Like, I give them a really quick, almost like the slug. And a slug is like your name, the publication's name, and a one-word summary of the article. So it's very similar. Yes, Paige, you're correct about Bonnie. Bonnie has rejected me a couple times, so I know that, at least for the moment, Bonnie's still there. Let me go back to Tom's question. Sorry, I saw that come in, and I was like, yes, I can confirm Bonnie is there. Yeah, so I would just hop in that person's DMs if you've talked to them a couple times and be like, hey, are you the right person to pitch this? Because when you frame it in that way, usually they'll be like, no, you should send it to XYZ, or yeah, send it to this email address. And I have landed a few pieces that way, or gotten rejections that way, or asked for sources. Last week, I was really struggling with this pitch I'm doing for the Washington Post, and I hopped in an editor's DMs, and I was like, hey, you seem to be really well connected in this industry. Like, do you know anybody I could reach out to? As it turned out, she could not. But I do at least get conversations started via DM and then move it to email as quickly as possible. Unless you know someone really well, it's unlikely that they'll take a full pitch or accept a pitch or commission you work in a Twitter DM. It's possible, but just that has not been my personal experience. Okay. Eunice says, in your pitch, you also mentioned that you were writing a similar topic for Teen Vogue. How are you able to find different angles on one topic? That's a really great question. And I want to touch on that because I got some really good advice from a fellow writer a few weeks ago. And she said one thing she likes to do in her pitches is say, I really loved your coverage of this subject. What I noticed was missing was XYZ. And that I kind of turned that, I did like a sort of version of that in this pitch. So in my New York Times pitch, I'll drop the link to that in case anybody doesn't have it. I'll publish the pitch verbatim so you guys can see that. Or if anybody has the link pulled up, you're welcome to drop that for me. But I'll go get it in a minute if we don't get there. So anyway, I mentioned Teen Vogue because I wanted the New York Times to know that this was something that other contemporary publications were writing about, and I wanted to establish myself as an expert on that subject area. So that's why I said, hey, like I've written about this for Teen Vogue for those two reasons. I wanted them to know that a quote-unquote competitor, I'm not sure if the New York Times sees Teen Vogue as a competitor, but I think of them that way. So I wanted to let them know that other people with similar demographic outreaches were writing about this subject, specifically Blair Mountain. And because it's a historical subject that does require some kind of research and reporting, I wanted them to know that I do have this background knowledge. I've done interviews, and not only that, but I have sources ready to go at the jump for this piece as well. So it kind of did double duty in that way. The difference between the Teen Vogue story and this one is that the Teen Vogue story was a historical recap. Well, it wasn't just a historical recap. I will say, when the thing about Blair Mountain is that it happened 100 years ago. people have written about it for 100 years. So when I pitched it, I really wanted to make sure that I had something I felt was new to say. So my pitch to Teen Vogue was, hey, did you know that long before Brown versus the Board of Education ever made it to the Supreme Court, there was an integrated army of minors. These people were, unfortunately, it sucks that we have to think of being integrated as like progressive, but for the time it was a progressive group of people in that they were black, they were white, and they were immigrants, and they were living in segregated towns, but they refused to structure their organization that way. They were like, hey, we know that the coal company wants us to be segregated, and we're not going to do that. We're going to integrate ourselves. So that was the original pitch, was like not just a historical recap, but trying to find something fresh to say about what had happened. But regardless, it was a reported feature. The Teen Vogue story was your sort of stereotypical reported feature with multiple sources and not a lot of voice and opinion from me. But the New York Times essay obviously was an essay. It was an op-ed. It was a lot of personal opinion, and it wasn't just sources. It was my voice as well. It was me saying, hey, this is how I grew up. This is what happened to me. This has been my experience. So that differentiated it. And I think you can do that with, if you have a beat and a niche, I don't see why you couldn't apply that same line of thinking. If you are doing reported features and you notice something that you have to say about that topic or a particularly compelling personal narrative, I think you are totally able to pitch personal op-eds, reported essays, and personal narratives about whatever your beat is. And I think it helps establish expertise too, because I mean, what I want people to think of me as is like a hillbilly writer. Like I want people to think of me as this like redneck leftist journalist. And so this essay, I think, did a lot to establish myself that way. So finding different angles, a lot of times you can do that simply by changing the genre of thing that you're writing, going from op-ed to reported feature to, a book review on a similar topic. If you change the type of story that you're pitching, you've automatically found a different angle. Oftentimes, I'll write about a national story for a larger outlet, and then I'll pitch a smaller localized story with local sources to a local outlet. A good example of that is it's so hard to like categorize points in quarantine. So when I say at the beginning of quarantine, that's like relatively speaking. But when we were first in lockdown, I started to write about how bluegrass bands were having to quickly innovate and learn new technology to stream, and how they were kind of leading the pack. And you wouldn't necessarily think of bluegrass artists as people who would, be technologically savvy, but they were. And I did it for No Depression, which is obviously a national publication, and I did it with sources across the country. And then I pitched that same story more or less to the Nashville scene, but with Nashville artists. So a lot of times you can write about the same thing, but just use a local focus. And that's kind of, there's a couple different ways that I get different angles out of things. Reporting and then personal essay, and then you can localize a national story, vice versa. You can write about a local issue for a national publication. I hope that helps somewhat with that question. So acquire sources or pitch first. Oh, buddy, you got to pitch first. I'm going to read the rest of it, but short answer is you got to pitch first. I have 2 pitches I'm hoping to get commissioned, but I've yet to publish any reported pieces with sourced interviews. I'm struggling how to go about this. I don't want to reach out to the source I have in mind without a guaranteed story. Thoughts, advice on this and moving into reportage as opposed to travel writing, personal essays in general. I have 2 pitches I'm hoping to get commissioned. Okay, got it. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I had it all in there. Okay. So yeah, one thing about the way that I run my freelance career and the way that most full-time writers will is that you have to reduce unpaid labor as much as possible. Pitching is not, I don't get paid for that unless, like you said, you have a guaranteed story. So pitching is also the #1 area where I probably spend the most time in terms of unpaid labor. Unfortunately, as journalists, we just don't get paid for that work, even though we're working hard to like think of sources, put together a good pitch, find the right place and the person to send it to and send it. That's all labor that we don't get paid for. And if you're doing this full time and you have bills to pay, then obviously coming at it from that lens, like you have to reduce the amount of unpaid labor that you do. So before you reach out to any sources, unless you already know them personally, or I'll give you some exceptions to the rule in a second, but 90% of the time I pitch and then I reach out to sources. The fact of the matter is that sources are replaceable almost always. Unless you're doing a profile or a Q&A, you're going to be working with types of sources or groups of sources and not necessarily an individual. So it is important in your pitch to identify which group of people you're going to reach out to. So for example, the Washington Post story I'm working on right now, I told my editor I would be reaching out to mental health experts and licensed therapists. That's not a single individual. So most of the time, you'll be able to let your editor know which types of people or what industry people you want to talk to, but they're totally replaceable. So if somebody says, no, I'm not available for an interview, great, just move on to the next person and ask if they want to do an interview. And in that way, you don't have to know your specific people before you pitch the story. So again, a strong pitch always includes your sources, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have names. And so I don't mean to make anybody feel bad about their sources, but it's just true. There's always another therapist that you could talk to. There's always another data analyst that you could talk to. However, sometimes, like I said, there are exceptions to the rules. If you're pitching a Q&A or a profile, then you might want to reach out to that person first. I have had to kill a story that got accepted because the game designer wouldn't talk to me. Basically, I pitched a profile on the guy who made Stardew Valley because it's just one dude, which is really impressive. So for the 4-year anniversary, I wanted to do a profile on him. Got it approved at Fanbyte. I think it was Fanbyte. Pretty sure it was. And then he wouldn't talk to me. And so I had to kill that story. And I've only ever had to kill 2 or 3 of my own stories, and it sucks. So thinking about it in terms of, I know my strong pitch has to have my sources, but they're generally replaceable, is a way to kind of get around that. Thoughts, advice on this and moving into reportage as opposed to travel writing, personal essays in general. Thoughts and advice. I mean, I feel like we've covered that, but if I left something out or if I didn't cover that question in depth enough, let me know, Samantha, and I'll come back to it. It's also the end of a very long day, so I'm sorry because I'm like racking my brain. I'm like, did I say everything I had to say on that subject? Like, I think I did. I'm pretty sure I did. Cool. Okay. I live in Bellingham where the recent homeless camp sweeps have been occurring. I want to pitch an op-ed about what I witnessed. You inspire me. Congrats again. Hey, thanks, Monica. I appreciate that. Yeah, homeless camp sweeping, not fucking cool. And I don't see enough in the news media about it. To the best of my knowledge, there's been dudes out there with like AK-47s in homeless camps, which is completely unacceptable and disgusting. So I hope that you land an op-ed. Sometimes, I mean, as you guys probably know, I do pitch edits. That's part of like how I make money. But sometimes I will comp pitch edits if it's important and you don't have it in your budget. So if you need help with that pitch edit and it's not in your budget, just let me know and we'll try to work on that. Because that's an important one. Thank you, Tom. Okay. When hoping to publish an opinion essay in the Times, what does a strong pitch look like and what emails should we be reaching out to? Since the MIT general guidelines only indicate they want drafts, I feel in the dark when it comes to op-ed pitching. Also, thank you. Yeah, so I did write this on spec. That's a really good point. So like you said, they want drafts first, which is what on spec means. It means you're writing it to their specifications. So you're writing it and then getting it approved. I rarely do that. If it was not the New York Times, I would not have done that. Because again, I don't fuck with unpaid labor. Like, I don't have time for it because I can't just call up my landlord and be like, hey man, they'll get back to me. I'm writing on spec. Sorry. Like, I approach all of this from a really practical lens. And so I don't do a lot of on-spec writing. I've done 2 of those, one for Huffington Post, and that was because it was about being non-binary and it felt really important to me. And the other was this piece because it was the New York Times. So basically, I pitched Chris and Lynn on the opinion desk, and she got back to me and said, hey, this is an interesting idea. I have some questions. If you write this, let me know. Because I didn't know that they wanted things on spec. So I sent the pitch instead of the draft. And her questions, I felt like it was hard for me to address in an email. So that was when I was like, let me just write this. Let me just bang out a draft and send it back to her. And I did, like 24 to 48 hours later. I was kind of... Let someone in. I was kind of like, it was definitely one of those few moments where you're like, like trying to bang something out. I really don't operate like that a lot, but the inspiration struck. So in terms of what emails you should be reaching out to, I mean, I would recommend pitching Kristen. If you're in any of the binders groups, those are secret Facebook groups that are for like non-cisgender men. Sorry if you're a cisgender man, but I feel like most people here aren't, so this probably applies to you. There are other freelancing groups, but I'm about to mention a specific one. Anyway, so there are some other opinion editors that you can pitch, but I don't know who they are. So I don't know if Kristen is the head of the op-ed department, and then there's a couple under her that take other maybe beats of opinion pitches. I know there are a couple other op-ed editors because I've seen them floated in those groups of like people to pitch. I just know the one that I worked with, and that's Kristen. And like I said, I had originally pitched the wrong person, so it's no longer Clay because I had pitched Clay in the past. And what makes a strong pitch? A strong pitch is the same no matter whether you're pitching a reported feature, an op-ed, a book review, whatever it might be. It needs to be clear and concise. There's no magic number, but most of my pitches are fewer than 300 words. Most of them are more like 200. I don't want to make you feel like you would have to adhere to strict guidelines, because if the content is bad, then it doesn't matter. If it's short, it's still not going to get published. But still, clarity and being concise is very important. The other thing that you want to do is make sure that you have an actual pitch and not an idea. The difference would be like saying, I would like to cover crime in Nashville. That's a topic. That's not a pitch. You need to have a specific narrative with specific sources. And so that's why including those specific sources is so important. This is kind of like your angle. This is your takeaway. If you're pitching an op-ed, you need to be able to point to a specific event or occurrence that you have an opinion or a takeaway about, and it can't just be like, I would like to write about my opinions on access to abortion. Like, that's a topic. That's not really an opinion. A pitch about that would be like saying, I'm going to make up a news event, but let's just say that there was legislation on the table that would prevent abortion for people over the age of 25. You could be like, hey, I have a particular opinion about this because I experienced an abortion at 25, and if this legislation passed, it would apply to me. That would be a very specific pitch. Instead of just pitching a topic or an idea, there has to be an angle. There has to be something solid and structured. And oftentimes that includes 3 elements, and that's, like I've already mentioned, your sources. Even in this essay, you'll notice I have, I think, 3 sources, but 2 are quoted, or 1 is quoted, 1 is unnamed but mentioned. So I have Charles Keeney, who wrote a book about Blair Mountain. I have the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum board director or executive director. And there's some background information that I can't remember if I attributed it to anybody, but I did previous interviews for this Teen Vogue piece, so it's all kind of in the mix. I hear my rice cooker making noises. I'm about to have to get up and check on it. I'm just really nervous. I just don't, it's too full, and I know that. So anyway. Yeah, so even in a personal opinion, most of the time you'll have to have sources, because I could tell you that I think Mars is going to crash into Earth tomorrow, but if I don't have, that's my opinion, if I don't have something to back it up, no one cares. Anybody, I mean, opinions are like buttholes. Everybody has one. Yours just has to be really good, and it has to include sources for it to be relevant. It also normally needs, not always, there are exceptions, but it also usually applies to, like I said, something in the news, something that makes it newsworthy, something that gives it timeliness, and a hook. That's part of any pitch, no matter what. The other 2 things are a word count and a deadline. So when I wrote this on spec, it was originally like 1,900 words, and they were like, hey, we need to cut this to 800. This is an exception to the rule, because in almost every pitch I do, I include a word count. Hey, I'm thinking 1,000 words. I can turn this in 3 to 5 business days. I like to include those elements because it shows that I know this business. I know that those are questions editors are going to have. I'm trying to pre-answer them. I'm also trying to remove reasons for them to say no. From a marketing perspective, when you think about selling something, oftentimes your marketing copy is aimed at objections or potential objections that a customer might have. Same in pitching. You need to think ahead and be like, okay, well, why would an editor say no to this? And see if you can succinctly and clearly answer every one of those objections in your pitch. Usually that's just by writing a really strong pitch in the first place, But I think that word count and deadline are two really super easy ways, and it's one line. Doesn't add a lot in terms of bulk to your pitch, and it makes you seem very professional. So those are some elements of strong pitches no matter what. Same thing for personal essay. It's not really all that different. It's just that the outcome of the piece will be different. I've won stories for the Washington Blade doing exactly what you're saying, the personal touch. Yes, Tom, I am glad that you have been publishing some work. I've seen that. And the personal touch is always important when you're doing, obviously, op-eds, personal essays. I'm coming back to writing professionally in a roundabout way that I have been, in that I have my first book coming out this year. Congrats, Allison. Shout out to Allison for your first book coming out. But I haven't written for money in years, and that was overseas. Ideas for ways to start freelancing at this time, perhaps leveraging forthcoming book, maybe through editing, or also what are my rates? Okay, you mean like what are, I need to ask for clarification. You mean what are my rates like when I publish a story, how much do I get paid? Let me answer that first. Most of the big publications, like MTV, Cosmo, Fanbyte, Business Insider, Vice, they all paid me between $300 and $400, every single one of them. Teen Vogue, too. I don't know if I mentioned that one, but all of the big national publications, they must all know what they're like. And I realize these are also bottom of the barrel rates, too. Like, if I had 100,000 followers and I had a household name, to the best of my knowledge, I've heard from anecdotally other writers that I would be getting paid more. I'm aware of that. Also, as a writer, I feel that it is ethical to, over time, negotiate your rate up, and I have been working on doing that. I do try to work with publications that pay me more. The Tennessee Lookout is a great example, so is AARP. I do have a handful of $1,000 bylines in my portfolio, but by and large, I'm getting paid between $300 and $400 per piece. That's been pretty standard since 2017. I could talk about why that should be different and how that could be different all day, but that's where it is right now. In terms of getting started freelancing, I mean, what you need to start doing is coming up with pitches and sending them. So whether that's sort of as you go or sitting down one day a week and starting to maybe brainstorm some pitch ideas, that's the way I did it in the beginning. When I first left my full-time job, I would at least once a week sit down and make myself have a brainstorm session, usually on Sunday night, so I could send my pitches on Monday. It was a way for me to establish that habit and establish the habit of staying curious. And I talk about like wearing your freelance hat a lot. If you want to write for a living, you kind of have to go through your life and through the world with this hat on, and it's called the Is There a Story hat, or else you'll never come up with enough story ideas to get by. So every time I'm going through social media, every time I'm interacting with anyone in real life, I'm thinking, am I having those same experiences? Does this jive with what I think is trending in pop culture? Does it not? Does it go against the trend? I'm always trying to find ways to connect the dots and to look for stories in everything. And so now I kind of like, whenever I have a story idea, I dump it in a note. I come back to it later when I'm ready to pitch it. And once it's pitched, it goes in my pitch tracker. But really, the only way to get started freelancing is to come up with some story ideas, develop them into pitches, and then send them to editors at the appropriate publications. For me at least, I didn't start getting commissions until 6 to 9 months into being full-time freelance. So in the beginning, every piece you have, you'll have to pound the pavement for. You'll have to pitch it. And still 99% of what I write is pitched. I've gotten a few commissions. AARP tends to commission me things about like dating and sex, but that is infrequent. And so by and large, everything I write is still pitched. So if you are able to put that hat on and maybe think about some, it doesn't have to be an op-ed, it could be a reported feature like, hey, this is the way the publishing industry has changed since COVID. I'm sure that's been written about before, but if you can come up with something new and fresh and timely, it's totally a story that you could pitch based on your experience. But you don't have to have experience or a beat to pitch a story. If you found a narrative and you have the angle and the sources and you know that you can do it, and by do it I just mean you know that you can turn the story, you can pitch it. So, I mean, I pitched a story about Tennesseans who bought GameStop stock last week. I'm not a trader. Like, I don't know shit about the stock market. I mean, I know about it generally because I like read the news, but I'm saying you don't have to be a certified anything in any industry to pitch a story. It helps, it helps a hell of a lot to have a source sort of like Rolodex built up, but just because you don't have that doesn't mean that you can't do it. So I say all that in case anybody is feeling imposter syndrome, because I feel that every day and I hate it so much. But you got to get over it if you want to start pitching, because the essence of getting a story is the right pitch to the right person at the right time, and you can control at least two of those elements. You can't necessarily control budgets, you can't control what the editorial priorities are, but you can write a really strong pitch and you can send it to the editor at a publication where it's a good fit. And that's really the first few steps to getting started. If you land the pitch first and then you reach out to expert sources, it gives you so much more clout. Yes, and the expert is more likely to respond to your email. Absolutely. Most people will not respond to you if you're like, hey, I'm a writer and I want to write about this. And they're going to be like, okay, great, for who? So that's a really good point that you bring up, Laura. And everybody acknowledged it. So good. Very supportive chat. We love that. Oh, and thank you for your work. Hey, you know what? I appreciate that, Allison. I am chatting with the daughters of the UMWA next week, and I'm also aware of some like black lung problems that are happening in Kentucky that are kind of getting out of hand and reaching epidemic proportions. So I'm not a coal miner, and my family doesn't come from coal, but they are family by experience. So we're going to see if we can't write about the black lung that Kentucky miners are having. Glad to see. Would read the hell out of that. Good. We love support. Thank you, Samantha. My dad was talking last night about drives from Ohio to Maryville in the 1930s and 40s. 2-lane roads for 400 miles. Yeah, you know, one of my favorite things about Christmas is that everybody... So I'm from... The part of town where I'm from is called Wildcat Ridge. And like when I was a kid, I would frolic, I guess, in the woods. I was kind of... I mean, I've always been an introvert, but especially as a kid... And I used to find abandoned moonshine stills. And so my family, I say that because my family is still very much in that, like, they don't run shine, but they're in the backwoods tradition. And at Christmas, they always get together and tell stories. And one of the things they were talking about this year was when Wildcat Ridge got electricity. And it's just interesting and fun to hear those stories. And that's like my favorite thing about my family. Because we don't always get along, but... they have interesting stories. Rate on a pitch edit. So that's a really great question. I have the rate on my website. If you go to abbyleehood.com and look at freelance services, it's on there. I have a $25 patron tier, but I'm phasing that out because that $25 tier was meant for people who want pitch edits, but then they like don't send me their pitch edits, and I don't want to take their money if they're like not sending me their pitches. It makes me scared they're going to get mad at me. And so I would rather not have that problem. So take a look at my website. Reach out to me via email if you need pitch edits. I try to do those as much as I can. Wondering if you carry health insurance as a freelancer. Buddy, that's a topic right there. I can tell you what I have in my personal experience. So, of course, I turned 26 last year. I turned 27 this year. So I lost my parents' health insurance. And then... Does my rice cooker? Says we have 10 minutes left. No explosions yet, so we seem to be in the clear. It's like this one pot meal, you know, and it's got like oyster sauce in it, and I just don't want it to bubble over. I can't smell it. I don't have COVID. I've just never been able to smell in my whole entire life. That happened when I was a kid, so I have no way of knowing when it's done other than like stirring it up and tasting it. Anyway, I have health insurance now, but I went for about a year without it. As I'm very transparent about, when I left my full-time job, I was not fully prepared to freelance, and I suffered a lot because of it, to the tune of like sometimes didn't have money for groceries. It has not been easy, and a lot of the shit that I know now is only because I really did not know it in the beginning. And so that is called learning by experience. So do as I say, not as I do. Don't be like me and leave your job thinking that 2 MTV bylines means that you can make it as a freelancer, because that is not the case. I've been writing for 7 years, but I thought once I had landed a few national bylines and was ready to leave my job, I just thought that it would be easy, and it wasn't. I wouldn't change that decision, but you know, if your opinions are like buttholes, lol, yeah, it's true. Everybody has one. But anyways, I finally signed up for market insurance. It kicked in January 1st. I picked a plan that's $300 a month. That's almost out of my budget. But I do have like a benign heart condition and some other like health problems to address, and so I needed to make sure that I had something with a lower deductible in case that heart condition turns into something that's like not benign. Also, my mother informed me that when I was a child, I had a hole in my skull that I don't know if is still there. So I don't know why that was never brought up growing up, but I didn't know about it until like 3 weeks ago. So when I went to go get my health insurance, I really wanted something that was like relatively comprehensive. And so yes, I have it through the marketplace. It's $300. My dental is an additional $15 a month. It does not include vision, and I'm blind as a fucking bat. So I'm gonna have to continue to maintain that. Actually, I just self-diagnosed that my vision prescription went from negative 450 to negative 4.75 because I know that it is, and these glasses help me see better. But I'm just saying that so that you know, when you're a freelancer, sometimes you have to wing this shit, and it's not always easy. And I do not take that responsibility lightly, and that's why I never romanticize what I do, because my life is great, but it is not perfect. And that means often you have to self-diagnose your vision prescription. Okay, moving on. Really enjoyed the piece. Thank you very much. How much did they edit the piece you turned in? Quite a bit, actually. Like I said, I turned in that original draft that was 1,900 words. I had to cut it down to 1,200 myself, which was fine. And then they wanted to cut it down to 800. I've been on edits on this thing since like November. I pitched this thing a really long time ago, and we've been back and forth, sometimes 3-4 weeks without any correspondence. And then just all of a sudden they were like, hey, it's running on Sunday. Can you finish this last top edit within the next 2 hours? And I was like, if it was anyone else, I would say fuck you. But it's not. So yes, I can. I absolutely can do that for you. And then we did it. So, yeah, I mean, listen, I'm really grateful. I'm being a little shit about it, but I'm so grateful that it published, and I'm in the New York Times, and it makes me feel really good. So take my attitude with a grain of salt. I am very grateful. So they edited it quite a bit. Oh, the other thing I was going to say about that is that even though it's a personal opinion, it was very deeply fact-checked. And so in the beginning, I made sure to annotate my draft, even to the tune of, I showed them a picture of my driver's license so that I could prove that I was born where I was when I said I was. And anecdotally, I can tell you that my editor said that that saved her a lot of time, and therefore saved us a lot of time on edits. So just be aware that down to the sentence, you need to have it annotated. AARP is the same way, so it was not out of my wheelhouse, but it is more strict than most publications. Rates for editing. Okay, well, we've covered that, so I'm glad that we've talked about both. Have you managed to negotiate the rate up for a publication which you've been writing for multiple times, or are they always a fixed rate? That's a really great question. I'm not in a position in my career to negotiate a whole lot. I ask, I'll say, hey, is there any wiggle room in that budget? A good example is a publication called Invisible People. They cover homelessness exclusively. I've written for them several times. The feature rate is $100. The last time I pitched, actually, they commissioned a story from me. They said, hey, can you write about this? I said, yes. This time, I didn't say this, but I was like, you're coming to me. You want me to write this. So I said, is there any wiggle room in your budget? Can we go higher than $100? They said no. I did the piece and went on about my business. It does behoove me to have 2 or 3 publications in my network that pay quickly, even if they don't pay a lot, so that if there's a time when I'm short on cash for the month, or somebody hasn't paid their invoice on time, I'll pitch people like that. Nintendo Life and Invisible People are 2 great publications. Feature rate is lower, but they pay very quickly. So I am challenging myself to work on negotiating my rate, but it's not currently a strength of mine. Like I said, mostly because I'm not at a point in my career where I can command a lot higher rates. I try, I ask, it doesn't always work out. In fact, most of the time it has not worked out. Tennessee Lookout has consistently paid me more, but it's also because I've been pitching deeper and more investigative long-form pieces. So it also has to do with what you're pitching. If you're pitching an $800 personal essay, it's going to pay a lot less than if you're pitching a 1,500 word, I said $800, I meant 800 word, you know what I mean, 1,500 word investigation. I could take a copy editing job this summer, but no, essay and op-ed writing is what I really love doing. Is copywriting a good entry point, or would you focus on freelancing, be more productive? Hey, I was a copy chief at our student paper for a semester, and I would say that that experience has been almost invaluable to me because I'm a really great line editor. And one compliment that I get frequently, or the most frequent compliment I've gotten from editors is that when I turn my copy in, it's very clean. And what that means is they don't have to go back and look for AP style edits, because I know AP style very intimately. I mean, I make mistakes. I'm only human. But one thing I really pride myself on, and things that I try to prioritize, are ways to improve myself as a writer that require no talent. And what I mean is, talent is one of those things that some people think it's inherent. I don't necessarily think of it that way, but there are easy things you can do to improve your writing that require no talent. Things like annotating your drafts really well when someone asks for it. Line editing first to make sure that your editor doesn't have to, make a lot of grammatical errors that really shouldn't have been there and are just a little sloppy looking. Things like making sure that you turn in all of your source audio and that your Google Drive folder with all that stuff in it is organized well. Those are things that set you apart from other writers that require no talent. And I know that because when I turn in another of the compliments that I've gotten from editors, this is just anecdotal, I don't have data, but one thing editors have complimented me on is the way that I organize my Google Drive when I file. Everything is subfoldered appropriately. I make sure that my file names are named after the source's last name so it's easy to find. Just little things like that. So copywriting or copy editing is a really great entry-level position, and I can say that because I've done it myself. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what not to do. I learned a lot about what gets on editors' nerves. Even though it was a college paper, it was a nationally award-winning paper, so there was some, not necessarily clout, but I'm saying it was set up like a real newsroom, quote unquote, and I learned a lot there. So you can, when you go for that job, if you do, talk to your editors about, what's the word I'm looking for? Non-competition or non-compete clauses. Because obviously when you get a new job, you'll have to sign some kind of paperwork. I would want you to be able to freelance on the side. I have never just had a job. I've always freelanced on the side no matter what I was doing. So anytime I go into a job, I have to let them know that. The hardest time was probably when I was at Apple, because Apple has really strict NDAs and you can't talk about anything tech. But when you're thinking about tech all day, it's hard not to pitch tech stories. So that was kind of a difficult time for me in terms of freelancing. But make sure that you are able to have that job and freelance on the side. You absolutely should be accumulating bylines even if you have a job. That's the only way that I got to leave my job. If you don't have experience in bylines, you can't leave your job. That just is what it is. Unless you have like a spouse who can support you or parents who can support you, you need to have a way to make income immediately after you leave that job. So that's why freelancing on the side is always good and is required if you want to do it full time. I hope that covers that. Other than big media outlets, how do you figure out which pubs can be a good fit? That's a great question. I have been known to do a bit of Googling. I've Googled socialist publications more than once in my lifetime. In general, one of the things I like to do is think about it in terms of category of publication. So if I'm writing something about beauty or lifestyle, I know that it might be a good fit for a women's glossy or like a women's magazine. In general, I keep a editor contact sheet, and I have one for Bitchin' Pitchin', and it's open source, so if anybody wants that, you're more than welcome to look at it or contribute. And basically from time to time when I come across a new publication or a call for pitches, I add that editor into that contact sheet. So I try to do these things ahead of time, and I believe in the, ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. So what I mean is it's always better to add new publications and editors to your kind of stock or your mental list or your contact sheet as you go versus coming up with a pitch that you don't know where to place. It's not that it can't be done, because it's definitely happened to me. Tenderly is a great example. I did a story about a rescue hedgehog for Tenderly magazine, but it was really hard in that moment to find a place where I could pitch a story about a rescue hedgehog. So it took me some Googling, and if you really are stuck, you can always join a Facebook group and say, hey, fellow freelancers, I've got this pitch idea, don't know where to pitch it, and they'll come up with some ideas that you haven't thought of. But in general, like I said, I try to update my contact sheet on a rolling basis, keep an eye out for calls for pitches. The thing about the calls for pitches is that if it's on Twitter or if it's in an aggregate newsletter, you probably are going to be competing against several hundred other pitches. So rarely do I respond to calls for pitches at that moment. However, I put them into my brain of like, oh, X person at X publication was looking for pitches about gender, so next time I have a pitch about that, I'll send it to them. And that's kind of how I work that. Yeah, like I said, I've definitely run into it where I've had to ask for ideas on where to pitch something. I've done that many a time, Googled publications in an area. There's no right or wrong answer. What's the best way to ensure that editors at the same publications don't get sick of reading your pitches or emails? Other than, of course, sending thoughtful pitches and respectful, non-aggressive emails. Yeah, that's a really good point. I find that I tend to toe the line between aggressive and annoying. I have to pitch a lot because I have to eat. So I send, on a month when I'm not doing the writer's course, because the writer's course takes quite a bit of my time. When I'm not doing that, I'm pitching 30 to 40, sometimes between 50 and 60 pitches per month. And you're right, I definitely feel that, like, I don't want to overwhelm an editor. I mean, if they've rejected, like, there are definitely, like, I'll just tell you, Business Insider, I did a really great, what I thought was a really great piece with them, and they haven't responded to me in a year. The same editor that approved that story that I did for them, that published, that I felt was good, like, they just haven't responded to me. So I don't pitch them anymore because I sent him, like, 6 pitches with no response. It really is on a case-by-case basis for me. I guess on the opposite end of their spectrum, there's Tennessee Lookout, which at this point I'm close enough with the editor that, like, the other day I emailed her and I was like, hey, do you want a story about local people who are buying GameStop stock? And she was like, yeah. It wasn't even really a fully fleshed out pitch because she's familiar with my work. So, like you're saying, keeping your pitches short and non-aggressive is very helpful. As you build relationships with editors, you'll come to understand that if they like your work and they're a champion of your work, as this outlet has been, you're not going to be annoying them. You're just providing them with more quality content. And so that mind shift change, I think that's what I was trying to say, mindset shift is helpful. But like I said, it is a case-by-case basis. And if I keep getting rejections, I mean, I haven't pitched New York Times styles in a long time because I keep getting rejected. And sometimes I just need a break to think about, like, what is it that they're rejecting me for? Like, what is the common denominator? How can I work on this? How can I fix it? Maybe eventually I'll pitch Business Insider again. Actually, the anecdote I have about that is that Teen Vogue rejected me for 2.5 years. I did a story for Teen Vogue in 2017, and it was not that good, to be honest. It was not my best work. I mean, it's not like bad, but like it wasn't stellar either. And anyway, I pitched them for 2.5 years and they rejected me. And then they took that Blair Mountain piece and like, look where we are now. So sometimes I just need a little bit of time to figure out what I'm doing wrong, and then I'll come back to it. But yeah, keep them short, keep them non-aggressive. Recognize when you're building a relationship with an editor. If you're getting rejected over and over by the same person, maybe you keep pitching them, maybe you don't. You can also try pitching different sections. You know, like I said, if you go from a reported feature to an op-ed, you're pitching a new editor because it's a different vertical. So that's also a good way to pitch the same pub, but different person. I'd like to do a reported profile Q&A with an up-and-coming groundbreaking artist in this country region that my general beating expertise is in. In this situation, should I still pitch first as opposed to reach out to their management and any general pubs that come to mind? That's a really good question. I think I would still pitch it first. But you're right. Then it does hinge on that person. You could, I mean, the thing about freelancing is that there's no guidebook. There's no, like, freelancing for dummies that has the right way to do it. So if you wanted to reach out to the artist, I mean, here's the thing too. If you pitch 100 publications, inevitably one person is going to say yes, unless there's something terribly wrong with your pitch. And if you've pitched like 10 people and they've all said no, then you really need to probably reevaluate why that is. Yeah, I mean, you could definitely reach out to the management and ask if they're interested. If you have any previous bylines, particularly in that subject area, that could also be, like, sometimes when I'm reaching out to a source, I'll say something like if it's about a sensitive topic, because sometimes it's really difficult for people to, like, relive their trauma with me, and so I want them to know I'm going to take good care of them, and I'll say something to the tune of, hey, if you want to check out my previous work on this issue, you can find that in my portfolio. So sometimes I will list my qualifications with sources because I want them to know that I'm gonna do my best, like I said, to take care of them as a source. You could also do the same thing in this situation. Reach out to management. Hey, I've got XYZ music publication in my portfolio, just so that they know you're like a real person and the real deal. If that's not the case, you may want to go with the pitch first thing, so that you have a publication under your belt. Because I mean, like, I have a couple of like informational interviews in the next couple weeks with people in the coal mining industry. I don't even have a story. I don't have a publication. That's really rare for me, but those people reached out and wanted to talk, and I promised them that I would, because it's something I care about. So all that to say, sometimes you do talk to your source first. Don't interview them. There's no need to interview them right now. Just let them know that you want to pitch this, and would they talk. And if they will, then maybe pitch it. That might be how I would go about it. But again, there's no right and wrong answer. So any general publications that come to mind. If it's in a specific country or region, you should probably be looking at national and regional publications in that area. You can also do music-focused publications. MTV still has a music section, believe it or not. So does Pitchfork. I like that one landed. Some of y'all laughed. Thank you. What are some other music publications? There's Pitchfork. There's Hard Times Magazine, which is more for rock, I think. There's Billboard, Grammys. Those are some music-related places you might be able to land it. Maybe even 17. I feel like 17 does music from time to time in terms of like pop culture people. When getting started as a freelancer, should you focus on finding and writing in a niche, or just write about everything and anything? Listen, I still write about everything and anything. I wrote this hillbilly essay, but you better believe I turned a piece on sex toys yesterday for my copywriting client, because I have bills to pay. So in general, you want to head towards the direction of an expertise or a beat or a niche, in my opinion. There are people who are successful as generalists. I have found that, I mean, this essay is a perfect example. As I've moved into like a sort of redneck socialist type of beat, people have started to like listen to what I have to say, and it's done a lot for my career. It definitely is helpful. Having a niche and expertise will benefit you. However, in the beginning, you may not have one. Do not let this deter you, is what I'm saying. So I still will pitch stories about like tree recycling in my hometown, because I think it's interesting. I don't always write in my niche, and I would argue that there are probably very few journalists who write exclusively about one topic for years at a time, all the time, exclusively forever. I'm sure there are some out there, particularly if you're a staffer, but in terms of being a freelancer, it's probably not the case. Most of us do copywriting and social media on the side for other clients, and those are rarely going to be in your beat area. So in the beginning, you'll have to probably be more generalist in order to hit the volume that you need. And as you're able to command higher rates and build relationships with editors and develop a niche, then you'll be able to do more of that. If you can do it from the beginning, great, but that just wasn't the way that wasn't the path of my career, or the map that I was able to lay out, so to speak. Did you consult with other freelance edits before you send in a piece? Do you consult with other freelance? I'm not sure what you mean, Kelly. Do I consult with other freelance editors before I send in a piece about, what kind of edits are we talking about? What did the Times pay you? They're paying me $250. They have not paid me yet. I believe it's on net 30 terms. I have not invoiced them yet, but the op-ed rate is $250 for normal Joes. I know that they pay more for like celebrity op-eds, like Tom Cotton or whatever. Celebrity being a loose association there. I did a piece for the Times last summer and had like a 5-day turnaround. There was quite a bit of editing involved in that. Yes, that has been my experience in terms of talking to other friends who've been published there. What did you learn? Where did you learn how to annotate and fact check a piece? That's a great question. The good thing about annotating is that you can do it right in Word, and in Google Docs you can put insert footnote, and that is an annotation, my friend. So in terms of like the bread and butter of how to actually insert it into a document, that is very easy. Fact checking means that anytime I make a statement, I ask myself how I can prove that it's true, no matter what I'm writing. This is also where the copy editing background, I think, comes in handy, because AP style lends itself to fact checking every date, every percentage, every number you ever write down should be fact checked, and that means it should be attached to a source other than yourself. You cannot say, well, I know that the sun sets at 5:45 p.m., And so therefore that's a fact. Like that, no, you have to go to the National Weather Service and have it from a source other than yourself. A fact is only a fact when it comes from a reputable source that does not include you, unless it's your opinion, and then it's an opinion essay, and so that's different. But in general, I'm always making sure I can prove everything can be stated. This is the way NYT works. It's the way AARP works. You don't necessarily have to have a footnote at the end of every sentence. You know, if you're describing a couple of pieces of data and you have a paragraph about it, you might want to insert a footnote at the end of that paragraph. Or if you have a collection of phrases and some information from one source and then you direct quote them immediately after, you can just put the footnote at the bottom of that section. So I generally footnote by section and not by line. But some people may want you to annotate by line, and that's also fine. So just make sure that everything that you say can be proved, including and up to your lead. Your lead also has to be proved, and I find that that's sometimes where it gets a little fudgy, because your lead is like the like gotta pull you in, gotta grab you in, but it also has to be true as well. Who is the best editor to pitch an invisible people? Hang on, and I'll find that for you. Erica. Is it Erica? Hang on, I'm looking in my inbox right now. Invisible Aaron, not Erica. I'm getting it right now. 1 second. Hello? That is not. Why are you being so difficult right now? Here we go. All right. Okay, so her name is Erin, but it's one of the only times I'll ever tell you to pitch like a general info box. So I just dropped the email. It's editor at, but her name is Erin, so you can address her by name. I never ever recommend emailing info at, general at, submissions at, unless you're specifically directed to, and in this case I'm telling you to do that. Because usually those are not managed or read by a human, and your pitch will never be accepted. Do you always send in the entire transcript of interviews, even if you're only using one quote? Yes, but that's because I transcribe in real time. It's not something that all of your editors or publications will require, but again, it is one of those ways I can go above and beyond that requires very little talent or input or creativity. When I'm interviewing a source, I type as they talk, so I usually mute them, whether it's on the phone or on Zoom, and I tell them I'm gonna, hey, mute while you talk so you don't have to hear me on the keyboard. So I transcribe in real time. It's taken a lot of practice. Some writers don't like to do that because they think it takes them out of the interview. They do their transcriptions later. That's fine. I just like doing it in real time, and I find that it doesn't take me out of the story. So that way when I'm done, I have what I call my interview notes. I don't list it as a transcript because it's not word for word, and there may be typos. Usually I don't go back and correct those typos. I mean, if I'm in the moment and there's like a pause and the person's not speaking and I see the red squiggly line, I'll fix it. But most of the time it's imperfect, and I turn it in that way, and I haven't gotten any pushback about it. Sometimes people will ask me for timestamps. If they're that specific, I'll go through and find the timestamps. It's no problem. Sometimes I've highlighted the section, like if there's a block of text where the direct quote comes from, I'll highlight that for them. But yes, I always turn the entire transcript in because I always have it, so why not? That's my opinion, even if it's not required. I like to do that. Do you think it's better to build a portfolio of the different publications or find a few editors' publications that you work well with? I'm at the point where I've gotten a few editors asking me for more pitches. Hey, that's great, but I'm wondering if I should be building my list of publications instead. This is a really great question, and something I wish that I had done in general is been more intentional about where I place my bylines. When I left my full-time job, while I still had my full-time job, I was just doing whatever I could, writing whatever I could for anyone I could, and that meant that I was getting a little money on the side, but I hadn't yet developed a niche. I hadn't developed an expertise, and I wouldn't for several months. I think it would have really behooved me to think about think about 3 to 5 years from now, what do I want to be writing about? And how can I make moves in that direction? And who do I need to pitch in order to make that happen? Having those thoughts would have been really helpful to me, but I wasn't necessarily experienced or aware enough to do that. So if, for example, you know that a certain byline a certain publication will benefit your career because it's attached to, because it has credibility or because it covers a specific subject you want to write about, I think adding that to your portfolio is great. Diversifying your bylines is always great. But I mean, there's a reason I keep pitching the Tennessee Lookout over and over and over again. And a lot of that stuff is general politics or general news. And it's just because they pay really well. So sometimes there is a benefit to continuing to work with the same publications. But if you know for a fact that there's a, hey, I'm trying to move in the direction of this beat, and these publications are really well known for covering that, you should be adding them to your portfolio as you can. If I had made some more intentional moves, I might have been in the Washington Post months ago. Like, who knows? But it just wasn't. I had to figure all this stuff out for myself, more or less. So a lot of that you will gain via lived experience over time. But think about it from not necessarily any other perspective other than like strategically for my career, where do I need to be published and what do I need to be writing about and how can I get there? I think that question is helpful to ask. Would I be comfortable adding you to the Binders group? Yeah, Hannah, if you can find me on Facebook, it's just Abby Lee Hood. Find me, add me as a friend. I will accept your friend request. And if I know this looks crazy, but my glasses are too tight for my head, so I can't stand them on my ears. So they're going to have to be up on my temple, and they're just going to have to look crazy. Boy, this video playback is going to be a hoot. But anyway. So yeah, find me on Facebook, add me. I'm just going to take it off because my glasses give me a headache. But now, I told you I'm blind, so you'll excuse me. Heard tons, but have never been a member. Yeah, I'll add you. Sometimes those secret groups can be a little bit difficult to add people to, but I will do my best. If you find me on Facebook, the way you'll know it's me is because it says, I do not use Facebook. This is a static post. It's because I don't use my personal profile, but I am in groups. Yes, do you consult other editors before sending in a written piece? No. So there will be some back and forth volley. I like talking about what I'm working on because it's top of mind. This Washington Post piece I keep talking about is a very good example. These streamers all have like that are my sources, right? Because that was my group of sources, was like, hey, I'm going to be talking to famous streamers with this specific like problem, and they won't fucking talk to me because they're too busy for the Washington Post. And I made a joke. I was like, boy, I fucking hope I'm too busy for the Washington Post at some point in my life. But for now, like, fuck you for being so stuffy you won't talk to me. But they won't. And so I had to tell my editor, like, hey, I'm really struggling to get these streamers. Can you help me? And so there has been a volley of emails back and forth, like trying to brainstorm sources, asking for support. I don't like to admit when I need help, especially as a freelancer, because I really want to impress my editor, but I'd rather ask for support and turn this in a timely fashion. I am over my deadline. That never happens. It makes me super itchy and anxious, but I'd rather ask for help and still keep to a somewhat timely turnaround than to not ask for help and just take forever. So I will sometimes ask editors for help, for input. Sometimes, especially if there's an investigation and there's some legal considerations, I'll be like, hey, can this person be anonymous? Can we do such and such for legal ramifications, that kind of thing. But I ask for help along the way. I practice good communication, and then when I'm ready to write the piece, I do, and I turn it in. So in terms of like letting an editor look at the draft ahead of time, I really don't do that. I'm also someone who, usually I sit down and do the piece in one go. I'm not someone who I don't know how other writers operate, but I don't write half of it and then come back later. I'll do that with copy, like blog posts sometimes. But the story, like journalism, feature stories, I usually sit down and do in one go. So there's really never an opportunity for me to share that with an editor ahead of time. On a related but not in your question note, I will sometimes share the graphs that sources appear in, or their direct quotes. And that's because sometimes those, there was a CFP that I interviewed for this tax story, and she was like, hey, I have to make sure for my job that I don't get in trouble for making it seem like I'm giving financial advice to anybody, and we need to include a disclaimer. And I had no problem sharing that, not the whole thing, because I do not do that. That is against my ethics, and it should be against yours as well. But from time to time, I'll let sources take a look at their quotes because I want to make sure it's accurate and that they're happy, and I don't want them if I didn't do that, they'd be in my editor's inbox bitching after it publishes. So I feel like it's doing my due diligence and making sure that it's accurate. Do you structure your source interviews as in prepare the questions in advance? Yes, I do. However, yes, I do also let the conversation flow depending. Also, what do you recommend I do if sources are people without smartphones, emails? I've seen some publications ask for this. Okay, so yes, I do prepare my questions in advance. If you're not prepared for an interview, you're going to look like a fool. Margaret Love, the previous pardon attorney for Bush and Obama, told me I was a fucking idiot, and that's quote unquote. This was when I was caught. Actually, she said, "You don't know what the fuck you're talking about." That's verbatim what she said to me. And let me tell you, having a presidential pardon attorney in the White House tell you that will make you cry. I know, because I cried on the phone, and it was embarrassing. So do not do what I did and go into that unprepared. I was able to turn it around because, as it turns out, I was a nervous college student and I knew the subject, but I wasn't explaining myself well. So since then, yes, I list out my questions ahead of time. However, I do try to humanize myself to my sources. So if they say something that resonates with me, I may mention that to them and say, hey, I've had a similar experience. If they're sharing something very vulnerable, I try to thank them for that. Thank you for being vulnerable with me. I know that this is a sensitive subject. So I do let the conversation flow, and a lot of times I'll have to ask for follow-ups. Like tonight, I was interviewing the CEO of a nonprofit, and he said, you know, they think this about that, and they, and I was like, well, who do you mean by that? Let me just clarify. Can I clarify that quote? I'll ask a lot of those follow-up questions. And essentially it goes back to that mindset of removing the no. Like when I'm interviewing someone, I'm trying to also think about how it might fit into the copy, or I notice if I have a question about something, so does my editor. Never let your intuition be lazy. If your gut is telling you to ask a follow-up question, I guarantee you that if you don't, your editor will make you do it. So if you need to clarify a piece of information, just do it in the moment. And it may be uncomfortable to ask push-backy type questions. Oh, well, you said you raised $1 million. This is not relevant to the interview earlier, but it's similar. Oh, you said you raised $1 million, but you only reported $300,000 on your earnings report? That seems kind of, And it can be uncomfortable to ask questions like that, but if you don't, you're just going to have to follow up with them when your editor asks for that information, so just do it in the moment. But like I said, if, tonight my source said a Twitch, he was referencing a Twitch plugin, and I had to ask what was that? And in the end, he sent me a screenshot of what he was talking about and visually walked me through what I was looking at, because I just wasn't familiar with what he was explaining. So yes, that happens a lot. And what do I recommend if sources don't have smartphones or emails? I don't remember the last time I reported an email or let me take that back. AARP right now is the only publication I work with that requires me to turn in like emails and phone numbers. Usually if I have the audio and the notes, it's good enough. Kristen at the New York Times did follow up with Chuck Keeney, my source in that essay, so I did provide his contact information. So I have done that, but most of the time if I have the interview and the notes, it's enough. I've done some man-on-the-street interviews, and in those cases, it's like, how do you get in touch with those people again? You can't always. My hedgehog is eating her supper. Sorry, I was like, what is that noise? She woke up and is eating. Okay, good. Anyway, it's 7:40, so she was like, it's supper time, even if you're talking and being loud. So, yeah, you don't always have to provide that information, particularly if they're uncomfortable with doing so, but if you can, great. I mean, if you're emailing back and forth with them, worst case scenario, if your editor asks for your email, they're in your inbox, so like you have it. But they don't necessarily have to have those things. Yes, Monica, Aaron, thank you. Well, Eunice said she had to go. That was quite some time. Bye, Eunice. Sorry, guys. Where do you look for copywriting and editing clients? Job board, networking, etc. Networking and cold emails. My biggest client I got through a cold email. My second backup client I just started working with, I got through recommendations. In about 1 to 2 months, I'm going to ask that client for a recommendation. So I got one client through a cold email. I asked them to introduce me to someone I knew they had a connection to. They did. I started writing some blog posts for them. And in a couple of months, I'm going to be like, hey, can you introduce me to this person I know you have a contact with? So I'm going to keep building my network that way. Word of mouth has been kind to me in terms of copywriting. How do I usually record interviews if it's on the phone? No, you're not missing anything obvious. That's a great question. I put the phone on speakerphone and I use voice memos on my laptop like I'm doing right now. because I don't have a Zoom recorder. I did in college. I borrowed one from the newspaper office, but they're like $200, and I don't want to do that if I don't have to. If I'm on the phone, I use my MacBook. Can we do some quick ask and offer for the folks in this chat? Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean. We could follow each other on Twitter. Yeah, drop your Twitter handles if you want to follow each other. That's so awesome. Love the support. Feel free to drop your handles. That's the end of the questions, and we've also been at this for an hour, and I'm very hungry, so I'm about to go. But is there anything you need from me in terms of like anything I've mentioned? Links. Do you need the pitch template? Do you need the essay link? Do you need the New York Times pitch template? You need that so you can see exactly what I pitched. Let me get that for you. 1 second. My computer is just being slow to load, and in the meantime, y'all can follow each other on Twitter because I'm sure your computers are moving faster than mine. All MacBook know is update, loud fan, and die. That is all MacBook know, and I worked for Apple, so I feel like I'm qualified to rag on the fucking MacBook. It's a great computer, but boy, is it struggling right now. And I have like 8 gigs of RAM, so like, for what reason? Okay, I'm just grabbing this link for you guys. Again, this is the verbatim pitch. Where do I keep my contact sheet? I'll get that for you too. If you need any other links or resources, let me know, and I will grab them. Grabbing some links. Boy, I hope that rice turned out good. Watch me go over there and it's like burned and stuck to the rice cooker. It would be so disappointing. Nicole, you don't have to include the details about rice again. It's not important for the transcript. God, this is so slow. But I know that I can get the other one faster. Here it is. New York Times solo pitch campaign. Let me grab that. Here it is. Copy link. Here it is. Hope your rice is okay, but it is forgiving. You're right. Rice is quite forgiving. And I followed a pretty good recipe, so let's hope. What was the other thing? The editor contact sheet that you need. Here it is. It's called the Bitchin' Pitchin' Editor Contact Sheet. I do need to update it and add some additional pieces of content to it, but by and large, it is up to date. Some writers were adding some things to it like last week, so I'm just getting the link for that. This should do the trick. Let's see here. I just need the share button. I'm like looking at the document. I'm just waiting on the share button. There we go. You'll notice that this contact sheet at the bottom is organized by vertical or section, or subject, however you want to say it. So you can go to op-ed, personal, food, travel, finance, games, news, etc. There's a game section because I write about games, and I'm assuming maybe some of you do too. I like to write about video games. On that note, I also do game guides from time to time. I've done 2 for IGN. I did the one for Animal Crossing New Horizons and for Carry On. So I am very open-minded about the kind of work that I do, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not stuffy enough to be like, oh, I can only do, reported stuff. It's not true. I do different work all the time. All right, looks like you guys have dropped your handles. Thank you for your kind messages. Samantha, I probably will have other calls in the future. When I'm running the writer's course, which I am right now, I tend not to do them, but then in between when I have more time, I do the free Q&A, so there will be more. So keep up with me via email and Twitter, and keep an eye out for those. Thank you, guys. If we didn't get to your questions, my DMs on Twitter are always open. I can't promise that I will get you an extremely timely response, but I will do the best that I can. I love you all very much. Thank you for being here. Have a great night, and I will see you the next time. Bye, guys.